It's really happening now. Emigrating or leaving Germany is now, by law, strictly forbidden for anyone who damages the reputation of Germany. Any political activist who poses a risk to Germany's reputation could now potentially be subject to travel bans, emigration bans, or similar restrictions. And that's exactly what has happened here. 8 people who wanted to travel to Italy for the Remigration Summit were prohibited from leaving the country. And you can think whatever you want about this whole story. You can think it's good, you can think it's bad. But what's happening here is a line that's being crossed, and it's a very, very critical one. And I'll explain to you exactly why. Because who decides here what is considered damaging to the country's reputation? That means, today it's the Remigration Summit. Tomorrow it could be a soccer match of a club that's somehow not wanted. Of course, that's a bit exaggerated. Or it's some other political opinion. Tomorrow it might be some leftist, someone who maybe says, okay, we need to redistribute wealth here. So the big question really is, who gets to define that? And of course, that could eventually end in complete arbitrariness. Joanna Coda also describes it very, very well here. Do any of the opponents of freedom ever spend even a single day thinking about the possibility that one day there might be a government in Germany that refuses to let left-wing activists leave the country, using the same reasoning that was just applied to the members of the IB? You don't have to sympathize with any group. You can even reject them. But the human right to leave one's country, to be allowed to leave one's country, belongs to everyone. That means you're not just facing restrictions within your own country, but you're basically getting, well, how should I put it, a prison cell order. In other words, you're basically locked up in Germany as if you were in a prison cell. Someone even asks in the comments, why is Baerbock allowed to leave the country? Hardly anyone damages Germany's reputation abroad more than she does. But even if Baerbock is damaging Germany's reputation, she still has the right to leave Germany. That's her human right, or yes, her basic right. And I already said this almost a year ago in my video about emigrating back then, that it would probably become more difficult to emigrate in the future, more difficult to leave the country. We're seeing that now. Maybe now it's. I don't know if you can already call it a ban on emigrating, but theoretically, it is a ban on emigrating. If you can't leave the country, how are you supposed to emigrate? And now they're probably watching to see, okay, what's the reaction? If there's no strong pushback, then they can just keep pushing it through. Then we'll just ban something else for them. Then we'll say, okay, he's wearing a green sweater, so he's not allowed to leave the country either. He has this or that, so he's not allowed to leave either. And if he wants to emigrate, because then capital would flee abroad, we'll ban that for him too. There's also an article from T-Online here. It says, right-wing extremists are not allowed to go to Italy. And again, I have the question, how is right-wing extremist defined? And like I said, I don't want to take sides here. I'm not trying to say whether what's being done is good or bad. To be honest, I don't really have any idea what's actually going on at this summit. Of course, they're discussing remigration here. But as long as, basically, no one gets hurt or attacked or anything like that, I don't really see a big problem with it. And even if I genuinely thought that everything happening at this Congress was complete crap, I'd still say it definitely crosses a line to not allow these people to push for their own opinions. I mean, even if someone is out there buying a bunch of shitcoins, or even if someone is preaching socialism or is the ultimate hardcore socialist, it would still never occur to me to say to them, hey, you're banned now, you're not allowed to leave the country, or you're not allowed to do certain things, or we're just going to lock you up because of your opinion. And of course, that's another kind of framing that's happening here. Everything is always labeled as far-right extremism, instead of just saying these are people who are critical of certain things or something like that. Here it says, at Munich airport, it was the end of the line for 8 supporters of the Identitarian movement. Martin Sellner was also at the event. I once did an interview with Martin Sellner as well. He also explained to me what's really behind this idea of remigration, that it's simply about criticizing the policies or immigration policy in Germany. But as I said, I don't know what actually happened at the summit. I haven't seen the videos, the talks, or anything like that, so I can't really judge it any further here. And I know that there will be some comments down below again like, yeah, that's exactly right, the right-wing extremists, and that's how it should be, and blah blah blah. But you really have to understand, if you support this now, that some people are being prevented from leaving the country, then it could be you tomorrow, with your own political views, who is stopped from leaving Germany. And that's why this is such a very, very critical moment. There was also an urgent application filed here, which was rejected. Travel out of the country will remain prohibited here until Saturday evening. Germany's reputation could suffer if there is no attempt to curb neo-Nazism, especially across borders. The justification was published by the Freiburger, blah blah blah, and so on. The interesting thing is that it says here, exit bans and passport denials based on the Passport Act are a tool that authorities regularly use against right-wing extremists, but which often do not hold up under legal scrutiny. There are figures available from July 2022. So we also see that these measures are often overturned in court, probably because they're unconstitutional or not in line with the basic law, since there really should be a permit to leave the country for people who just want to go abroad, or who might say, hey, I don't like it in Germany anymore. I want to emigrate. Maybe I want to live somewhere else. Maybe I just don't like it here anymore. I just want to make my home somewhere else now. It goes on, therefore. It cannot be ruled out that the travel ban is suitable for the purpose of protecting Germany's reputation. A main proceeding will be held to decide on this matter. It is possible that the measure will later be declared unlawful. Well, of course, that would be great if that happens. But it still can't be right that they can just push this through in a super fast-track process. And then afterwards you have to go to court to fight for your rights and basically go through the whole shit show here. But that's really the system we're building right now, also with laws like this, where you're not allowed to express certain opinions anymore. If you express those opinions, you're immediately labeled as an enemy of the system. And the question is, who is considered an enemy of the system? Who defines that? And then certain laws can be passed because of it. That's even in the new coalition agreement. I don't remember exactly what the clauses are called. I just looked them up. So, in the coalition agreement it actually says, the deliberate spread of false factual claims is not protected by freedom of expression. That's why the Independent Media Oversight Authority must, while respecting freedom of expression and based on clear legal guidelines, take action against information manipulation as well as hate and incitement. That means, the way we've just seen it here in this case, this paragraph could also, at least in my opinion, though I could be completely wrong, be used in the future to prevent people from leaving the country, or of course to punish them or impose other sanctions on them. And the question here is, what is the deliberate dissemination of false factual claims? That is, what exactly is a false factual claim? We've had so many instances where factual claims were declared false, but now they're completely accepted, where you can just say, okay, back then it was called a conspiracy theory, but now it's just common knowledge. Everyone knows that's how it is. For example, I found 3 pieces of so-called disinformation from ChatGPT that later turned out not to be so wrong after all. First, there's the origin of the pandemic, the whole lab thing. At first, it was declared that it simply came from a lab, and so on. What came out later? It turns out you can't rule out that it was a lab accident. And then the same thing happened with the side effects. Later it turned out that there might actually be some after all. With the Nord Stream explosion, ChatGPT also found a difference between what was originally published and what later came out. And the takeaway here is that what is fought as disinformation today could be closer to the truth tomorrow than the official narrative. When the state starts defining what is true and criminalizing dissenting opinions, it can lead to authoritarian structures, even if the intentions are good. And that's exactly the issue. It's often well-intentioned. I don't even want to blame the people who do this, at least not entirely, because in their minds, their intention is, hey, we really think we know what's right and wrong here. We really think we know that we're somehow connected to God or that we've got all the wisdom in the world, and that we clearly know what people should and shouldn't do. That's often the case in socialist systems. That might sound really, really harsh right now. That, let's say, restrictions are put in place for some people, but those who do it are either very consciously or unconsciously, but absolutely convinced that what they're doing is right. The problem is that the whole thing is a huge illusion, and people are trapped in their own illusion. But the problem is that, even so, other opinions are still suppressed, and so on. You simply shouldn't, I'd say, slip into the role of a god or something like that, as always happens in socialism, where people think, okay, now I have all the information about everything. I know what everyone should and shouldn't do. I know what's right for people and what's wrong for people. We're also seeing more and more of this in the EU, with all the regulations being imposed here. Then you get dictated to from Brussels on high, hey, this is right, this is wrong, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. Meat is really, really bad. Other things are really, really good. And I'm saying this as someone who doesn't eat meat myself. I still would never want to forbid anyone from eating meat. I mean, everyone should have their own experiences. Everyone should eat their meat, their steak, or whatever they want, if that's what they want to eat. It would never occur to me to forbid anyone from eating meat, even though I don't eat meat myself. But you also always have to be able to live with the consequences of your actions. That means, for example, if you express an opinion that might be, in quotes, radical or polarizing, then you also have to expect that you might get some verbal pushback. Or if you eat meat, for example, there might be certain effects that has on your body as well. For example, meat obviously takes much longer to digest than, say, a banana or even a watermelon or something like that. And if you can handle the consequences, if you say, okay, it's not a problem for me if meat takes longer to digest than, say, melon or something like that. Like I said, I wouldn't judge it at all. Then it's totally fine. And people should just do what they want. And it's exactly the same when you use Bitcoin. That also has certain effects, certain consequences. And if you don't use Bitcoin, that also has certain effects and consequences. If you don't use it, you might get expropriated, robbed, blah blah blah. And if you do use it, then of course you become wealthier, more prosperous, you gain more wealth, and so on. That means you should be able to decide freely. But you always have to live with the consequences. So if you want to get rich, you should have Bitcoin. Or if you have Bitcoin, you shouldn't complain later that you're getting rich now. And if you save in fiat, you also shouldn't complain if you end up poor afterwards. What's really cool about the whole thing is that you can enter and leave the country, ban things, downgrade passports, and so on. That might actually happen more and more in the future. There are already a lot of people who are getting second passports, so that something like that can happen, and so you have a backup option. If necessary, you could even give up your German passport. You really have to prepare yourself for that. I've already made a lot of content about emigrating, like how this invisible wall is basically being put up with exit taxes, now exit taxes on ETFs, and of course exit taxes on companies. There could also be capital controls coming, and all sorts of other things. And that's why I always say, if you want to leave, it's best to get out as quickly as possible and not wait until someday the borders are closed. Or maybe not closed. But it's not like the borders will just suddenly be closed. But things like this can happen, where you're labeled as system critical or something like that, and then maybe you can't leave anymore or something. Of course, right now everything is still considered a conspiracy theory. But in my opinion, a lot of conspiracy theories have already come true. Bitcoin is uncensorable money here. It's not subject to censorship and can't be accessed by the government. That's why I always recommend Bitcoin. I'll also include a link for customers to 21 Bitcoin. If you want to buy Bitcoin easily, safely, and simply, you can use the code Bitcoin Hotel. You can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin there. Guys, I'll see you around. See you then. Peace out.